Pardon an interruption, this is Troy Hill with the Star Chronicles. If you haven't heard about Anchor, it's the easiest way to make a podcast. Let me explain. First of all, it's free. There's creation tools that allow you to record and edit your podcast right from your phone or computer. Anchor will distribute your podcast for you, so it can be heard on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and many, many more. You can also make money from your podcast with no minimum listenership. It's everything you need to make a podcast in one place. So if you're interested in making your own podcast, download the free Anchor app or go to anchor.fm to get started. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. This is the Nights at the Sound Table. I'm your host, Troy Hill. Tonight, we got Darius Lewis. We got Brian Norris. We got Lee Bolton. And Brian has a very special guest this evening that he would like to introduce. Let's kick it over to Brian.
Sure. Thank you very much, Troy. I do have someone special that I wanted to go ahead and introduce tonight with us. He's someone I've known for a while, and on a personal level as well as, professional. He is a minister. He is a deputy sheriff. He's an author and an entrepreneur, Raashid Brown.
Well, thank you, Brian. I appreciate it. First of all, I just want to say thank you to you guys for allowing me to come on your platform for such an intriguing topic, especially with what's going on in the nation. A little bit about myself. I've been privileged to serve our community as a law enforcement officer for 10 years between two agencies. Did a little bit of work in Kansas City. Some also did some work in Dallas, Texas, and now I'm back in Kansas City to help progress policing. Is pretty much the invitation I got. So I'm back home and looking forward to getting back to work to put some good seed in the ground for a better tomorrow. So thank you guys again for the opportunity to be with you guys tonight.
Oh, not a problem at all. We thank you, and we certainly appreciate on our program. Lee, what is your question?
Hey, Raashid, my question would be, being that you are in law enforcement and we are going through this trying time right now, and as a nation and as a Black or African-American community, it's been a lot longer than that. Do you see being on the inside as far as the police work and the precinct, do you see that type of tension or feel it as far as the racism, or whether it be black on white, white on black? Do you see any of it, or is it hidden, or have you ever seen it, or has it been hidden?
Well, thank you, Lee, for the question. Honestly, man, that tension has always been there in law enforcement. I can remember the day when I walked through the door in 2009 to the agency to which I worked for, the feeling of an African-American, a tall 6'5" African-American male coming on to the department. I was the first African-American that this department had hired in 10 years. 10 years. So I was being trained by people who, in my own estimation, did not have good perceptions of my own culture. When I worked for an agency in Dallas, Texas, it was the same exact tension, and especially the trauma would happen when issues like what's going on in the world today with George Floyd going on. You can feel that tension even in the briefing room before we went out on patrol, of how certain officers' thoughts and perceptions, and then little comments would be made when they're in certain groups. So yeah, those tensions are there, and they're real. As you stated, this has been something that's been going on forever, and it's not going to change overnight. But yeah, those tensions are real. They're real.
I guess my question would be, what type of with all this like little different things going on? I mean, and I feel that, it's more to it than just law enforcement, because there's like a whole bunch of other things that people, I think, need to be retaught things. A lot of things that are going on right now is things that people are brought up to believe. But what do you think on the law enforcement standpoint? What things you think could be implemented to make it easier or better for, the interaction with African Americans and people of color, or even if you're African American and you're going into a white area, Is there anything that you can provide as far as things you think could make that better?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there's a term that's been around. It's been called several different things over the last probably 2 decades or so. But it's a term that I like to use called community policing. It's actually a term that was used in 2015 when a task force was assembled together to talk about what we could do as a nation to bring our government officials, our community, and our law enforcement together for collective change. And the term again is community policing. It's where communities are used to, all communities, to be honest with you, all ethnicities are used to, when they see law enforcement, we're always enforcing the law. So it's usually by some bad situation. We're arresting somebody, we're going to bring order back to chaos and all that good stuff. Community policing moves away. We still have that notion in our mind of bringing order to chaos, but it's also partnering with organizations to bring resources to that community, because obviously we found out through statistical data, where there's crime, where there's poverty, there's crime. So we realize that rehabilitating people is not working, of taking an individual from their house, putting them in jail, but partnering with organizations to bring resources and to do some positive engagement outside of the police athletic league, just so communities can see us in a different light, which would then open up the door to have positive conversation in hopes that they would lead to positive changes in the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's I think that would be an excellent idea. You know, it's unfortunate because I mean, we all see videos. We actually do see videos of cops of multicultural, like going into different areas, or whether it's playing basketball or just sitting with kids on the block, just sitting there having a conversation. So we see those things happen, but we also see the videos of violence and everything like that going on as well, which kind of makes it, difficult because people, you know how it is, you can see like 10 or 15 different good gestures done by somebody, then one bad thing kind of like erases everything else. It just erases the slate. Right. What do you got, Darius?
I just wanted to ask you, Raashid, as far as like the background requirements for the officers carrying weapons, what type of training do they have to go through in order to be, perceived as the officer that can carry a weapon? And is that like reviewed on an annual basis, or is it just like from the initial point when they pass the test or something like that?
That's a great question. So typically, when you get hired on as an officer, you have to go through a series of processes to get to the point of becoming commissioned by the state to be a peace officer. We call ourselves police officers, but the technical term for us is peace officers. But the issue with that, Darius, is the training is actually different depending upon what state you're in. Some counties and some agencies have the bare minimum, which may be 400 to 500 hours of police training, while others require up in the thousands. So part of that is, you go through a psychological test. You also go to a firing range to learn how to shoot accurately at a target. But there's a lot of what we've found out in policing now is that there's a lot more decisions that go into having to use that firearm. De-escalation then comes into play and all these other factors. But there is some training. But I'm gonna be honest with you, I don't think we get enough of it. Yes, we can go shoot and go qualify, is what they call it. So typically departments have their officers qualify once or twice a year under different settings, meaning you go during the daytime, you go at nighttime, things of that nature. But that is a perishable skill that we should always be working on to become better with our marksmanship as it relates to firearms.
Yeah, well, how about that's an excellent answer, but how about like on a psychological standpoint? Because just like regular people and people are law enforcement, they go through things too. I mean, it could be a very violent experience or something that happens in your field that you go through, and it might change you slightly. Is there psychological tests that have to be done annually or performed to make sure people are still psychologically right to be a law enforcement officer?
That's a great question. So typically when you go on, before you get hired on to a department, they make you go talk to a psychiatrist. They ask you have to fill out 300 or 400 questions. You talk to a therapist, and they kind of get a profile of if you're suitable enough for the uniform. But then also, depending on what department you work for, after you're involved in a major incident, whether that's you having to use your firearm, you've seen a horrific traffic accident, or anything of that nature, been involved in a very serious, high-stress situation, officers, we've started to notice as well, are starting to have the same symptoms of PTSD as they would in the military. So there's some officers who have to go speak to somebody. I myself went through a traumatic incident and had to go speak to somebody to work through that process. Because when you sign up to be a law enforcement officer, most of us come into this with the idea of helping people, but the stuff that you see it's horrific. I mean, you see people often at their absolute worst. You see the absolute worst things, and then having to grapple with that, and then come home to your family, come home to your wife, your kids. That's a hard balance that no police academy, no training can prepare you for that. So that is a very, it's a very serious thing that a lot of officers are working through. And I'll be honest with you, we in law enforcement need to do a better job of having that assistance for our law enforcement officers, having those programs and having those alternative things that officers can go to. But it's like anything else. Sometimes there's a shame and a stigma with going to seek help because you don't want to be labeled as that individual who has problems. So that's something we continue to have to work through in law enforcement.
And I 100% agree with that because, just even just, like with me and I mean, several other people, just are like regular everyday jobs, that's always the case, like almost in everything. You go through stuff and sometimes you don't want to talk about it and go through it with somebody, but you really do need to get that help, no matter what profession you're in. Let's go ahead and kick it back over to Brian. What do you have for your first question?
Well, I guess my first question would be for you, Raashid. When you're in law enforcement and you're doing your day-to-day, activities, how much does, maybe your ministry or religion plays into it? I would think that there's some kind of mechanism that kind of keeps you level and keeps you steady. So how much of that would you say plays part in what you do?
Thank you, Brian. That's a great question, man. Everything about me being a law enforcement officer ties back into my calling as a minister. I think that law enforcement is not a job that you can just wake up one day and decide this is what you want to do. You have to be called to it. I actually have a burden for it to not only just for my community, but for people. And I knew when God called me to ministry, I've been preaching now for 12 years as a minister. I knew that my calling was connected to people. And I thought that it was just going to be in my local church. But I realized that God had given me the gift of having a larger platform, and that's by affecting change in the community. That's part of the reason why I enjoy being a law enforcement officer, because I get the opportunity to make an impact on somebody's life every day. And I use that impact in a positive way. That's why earlier this week, we worked with organizations during this pandemic. We know that families are hurting, so we're feeding 500 families a week, and I'm organizing that for the next 12 weeks because it's about the ministry and it's about helping people and meeting people where they are. Yes, I'm trained to be that law enforcement officer. I've led people to Christ from the backseat of my patrol car before. I've done all that, but I look for the opportunity to serve people. And law enforcement is just that great opportunity to get engaged with the community, to serve individuals. Although we take our lumps like anything else, but I promise you, there's good officers out here who, not just me, other believers who are called to change this system. And you can only really change it from the inside out, not from the outside in.
Excellent.
Amen. Amen to that. But let's go ahead and do this real quick. Let's go ahead and take a quick break and hear from our sponsor, Anchor, the easiest way to do a podcast. This is the Knights of the Sound Table. I'm Troy. We'll be back here in a few moments. Back and every one of you for taking the time to tune in and listen to our podcast. We have Darius, we have Brian, we have Lee. We also have special guest, law enforcement officer and minister Raashid Brown with us this evening. Are you having a good time so far, sir?
This is great. I'm enjoying it. Having a great time.
Okay, great. We certainly appreciate taking the time to join us this evening. Go ahead and kick it to Lee with the next question.
Okay, Raashid. So I'm going to get right into my next question. And it will be, we all have our own journeys and certain ways we find spirituality, God, Yahweh, or whatever you want to call that
Mhm.
entity. Um, I would like to know how you started your journey as far as the spiritual journey and finding God and creating your own relationship with Him.
Wow, man, that's a wonderful question. I was raised in church, man. My mother was a single mother raising three kids, so church was our foundation. That's all I knew growing up. And at about the age of 10 or 11, I started playing the piano and the organ, became a musician in the church. And my godfather, who's resting with the Lord now, was my father figure. And he exemplified before me working every day, pastoring a church, being an excellent leader. He died suddenly in September of 2006. I was a freshman in college and it devastated me. And he was in my life that person, that spiritual person for me. It wasn't until he died that I had an awakening that I had to find Christ for myself, man. And it was a journey that was difficult because to for that advice and the person I looked to as that example was gone suddenly. But it was in those moments where I found Christ and I was stuck in between two places of in between going from being a teenager to being a man and having questions and all that good stuff, man. And I had to find comfort really in the scriptures, man, because that's what he had laid in my life. Not just by word, but even by how he lived. He set a foundation in my life of the word, and that has just been able to open my eyes. About 18 is when I got on the journey of really developing my relationship with Christ. And I can't say, man, it's been easy, but it's definitely evolved to be such a beautiful resource for me.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. Amen. That's great.
Yeah, and that's a that's and the reason why I want to ask that because I know just being in the position you're in, as far as being a minister and then a police officer, then you come in contact with a lot of different people with different backgrounds, believe in different things, different religions. And so when you have those encounters and they may not go how you think they should go, or they might turn into someone making a racist remark or something. I think having that good quality relationship with God only helps and enhances you to be a better person
Absolutely, absolutely.
because
I'm sorry.
we don't need anybody to you know make us feel that way but God,
Right, right.
so
And there's some.
I can
Thank you, man. There's some times where Rashid has wanted to take over in a lot of situations because I'm human, subject to feelings like everybody else. So you get angry, you get frustrated, you get burdened. Even with the climate of the country right now, this isn't the first time we've been here, and I've been frustrated being a black man having to put on a blue uniform or a brown uniform. It's frustrating, but it's having the help of the Holy of Christ in my life and the Holy Spirit to acknowledge me that this is what I'm called to do. And sometimes with callings and with purpose, there's challenges along the way, but it gets better. And I'm optimistic that even at every day, even though it's a struggle and a challenge right now, we're moving towards better days, and that's what gives me courage and strength.
right. Okay.
Oh, that is really great. Let's go ahead and kick it over to Darius. What do you have for another question?
Hey, Rashid, from your perspective, why do you think people truly don't understand the frustration and the pain and the suffering of the black people having to endure police brutality? Do you think it's like lack of education or just, like common stereotypes? Because I see a lot of stuff, people posting things, and it's like they really have no idea of like what we have to endure. So I just wanted to maybe see like if you think there's some things, from the police department or, that way they could maybe educate people on it or something.
Right, man. You know what I found, Darius? That's a great question. One of the most expensive things in the world, the most expensive thing in the world is ignorance, man. Ignorance. And I think what it is, man, is from a certain aspect, yes, I think some people are not educated. Even our own people, even African Americans, are not really educated about the dealings of law enforcement, the history of American policing, even going back to paddy rollers, which were slave patrols and things of that nature. But more so, I think it's just the lack of education. But there is some good that I'm starting to see out of what is occurring in the country is because now, not that it hasn't been before, because we've had incidents before, but there's a new generation who just witnessed something, and now they're asking their parents questions about why this is like this.
Hmm.
And that's kind of
Mm-hmm.
really resonating with me over the last few days. I noticed, even when I'm watching on CNN and even in my own community, the protesters, I noticed that there's a lot of questions being asked that some generations, some ethnicities have never asked before. And people are horrified. And I think it's more like an awakening going on that now. I've always tell people
Right.
this too, man, that empowerment without education is ignorance. We can be empowered, we can be have all this zeal to want change, but we have to educate ourselves so that we're not ignorant because history does repeat itself. America has been
Oh,
here
absolutely.
before. We've been here before, but I'm really relying on this feeling that I'm having that there's a lot of people now of all ethnicities asking questions. Did you see that people in London are protesting what is happening in America? When has that ever
Hmm.
Yeah.
happened? When has that ever happened in our country where people in other countries are starting to awaken to what's going on? Which to me, even though this situation is horrific, it's terrible. I wouldn't want this to go through for anybody. But I'm noticing that this is what sparks reform when the world says we got to do something different.
Right.
No.
It opened up the lines of communication. It seems that now they have to talk about it. Now sports organization owners have to
Right.
talk about it. So, you know, in all bad, there is some good. I
Right.
always feel that way. Um, whether we wanted it to happen or not, but like you said, there is some good
Right.
coming out of it, and we can only
Right.
move forward from it.
No,
Absolutely.
absolutely. So you definitely have hope that you can see things are getting better. I do think there is this new generation of younger people that seem to be being very vigilant in protesting and and mostly very peaceful during these protests. What do you think people like our age? I mean, we've seen these things before. Just numerous times, especially since like the past '90s. We've seen like old videos stuff during the '60s of things happening and going on. What do you think people our age should try and do as far as taking an approach on something like this? Because time
Hmm.
changes people.
Yeah.
Because I mean, there's like several people that I consider to be like some great friends growing up, but now I see some of those people posting things that are like completely and just utterly ridiculous.
Right.
So I mean, I know life can harden a person and change them, but so what do you recommend for people our age to do as far as whether it's level of protesting or just as far as like re-educating
Wow,
ourselves?
man, that's a wonderful question. I think one of the best things that people of our generation can do is help guide the younger generation, not necessarily physically of being on the streets unless you're led to do that, with helping with the protests or protesting for the rights, but guiding even their thoughts regarding how to get the work done. Because I think with the protesting, they have to understand that this is something that we're not going to be able to fix in a week's of protest. We can even do a year of protest
Yes.
every day, and it still will not fix the issue because this is a systematic issue that has happened over decades, over centuries that we're fixing. However, I think the
Hmm.
guidance into their mindsets to say, hey, if we're going to do this change, that's why we have to get in these positions and we have to use our influence, whether it's in local government, even in our own communities, or even with the local or joining a law enforcement agency to not only just protest on the streets, but you also have to get into the establishment so that you can gain the influence to be a part of the change too. Because I truly believe with law enforcement, the change that's going to happen is going to happen from the inside out, whether it's reviewing our policies and procedures of the use of force. And I will even say this to piggyback. There's two areas that always bring about the most serious litigation against law enforcement agencies, and that's failure to train and failure to supervise. Any lawsuit that typically comes is going to fall under those two parts. You fail to train or fail to supervise. And so helping to gain the education and help guide the young people with their protesting so we can get involved to make those decisions because decisions that need to happen, they have to happen on high levels and it starts with leadership.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. And younger listeners or even some of our older listeners, make sure that you go vote. I mean, I'm not talking about just voting for president. I'm talking about all the way across the board. Do your research, vote for the best individual that can do the best for your community, or for whatever your situation is. Let's go ahead and kick it back to Brian. What do you have for a question?
All right. Raashid, when it comes to far as your other adventures, I mean, I know you've done some public speaking, and you've done some sermon in churches and stuff. Do you have any other, activities or anything you have planned coming up?
Yeah, so I've actually recently taken on the assignment of being a consultant for a local amusement park here in Kansas City, to help kind of lead that change as well from their department, especially when it comes to training younger officers before they even get into law enforcement, with community policing, dealing with cultural diversity and things of that nature. And then right now, man, because of COVID, a lot of stuff has been shut down. So I'm just trying to use my voice to be an advocate for those who don't have a voice. And then also, like I mentioned, about feeding families every week. Just actually Tuesday, we fed 500 families. And for the next 12, 11 weeks, we're going to feed families, and it could go up to the end of the year as long as there is a need. So I'm just trying to keep my hand and my heart busy for the assignment and for what's necessary to make our communities better.
Excellent. I'm glad to hear.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, it is definitely glad to hear. And then, again, I like to emphasize to the listeners that just about in everything, whether it's people at your workplace, you're going to have like one person you're not going to really want to work with. But that's only one person. There's that one bad apple. There's several good law enforcement officers in the country. And unfortunately, like I said earlier, it just takes the act of a couple to ruin the impression of, the whole force. The same thing goes for the community, no matter what color you are. It just takes one act of one specific person, and it just ruins people's train of thought on just like that one person did it, so everybody else must be that way also. So what I ask is just all the listeners, just get your soul right, become educated, and just realize that there's so much more than what you're actually even thinking of. You need to release some of the ideas that you have in your mind, because it's not always that way. What do you have, Darius?
No, I totally agree with you, Troy. I think with everything going on right now and throughout history, people need to just kind of get their souls right, for one, and educate themselves, because a lot of time what you're seeing on the media and what you're seeing, in the news even is not reality. So you can't just stereotype other races, other people, based off of those things.
Absolutely. And a lot of these YouTube videos, I'm sorry, take another additional 15 seconds to realize that YouTube video you were watching was absolutely incorrect. I know it seems provocative and everything, because it just seems so different from whatever the opinion is, what the norm is. But you're just peddling more garbage. You're thinking you're woke, but you're actually unwoke. Don't minimize how people are grieving over this by trying to find other random things that happen to other people, and asking where's the outrage over this. Well, there was outrage on a lot of those things, but you weren't paying attention when the outrage was going on. What do you got, Brian?
I'm kind of a lighthearted, part of this interview. I just wanted to say that my understanding is Raashid is a huge Temptation fan. And I wonder who his favorite character, who is his favorite artist in that? Which one is it?
Man, you cannot have the Temptations without David Ruffin. I don't care what nobody say. David Ruffin is the guy, man. You hit me with that out the pocket. You can't do it without, man. Brian, I'm gonna get you for that, bro. I'm gonna get you for that
one. Wow. You got the moves down and everything, man. Tell him about
it. Wow, bro.
Don't cheat yourself,
And what do you got?
Empathy. Let's all practice empathy, and more love, and more love, and more love.
Yep,
God is the
absolutely.
key.
And again, I would like to thank, we would all like to thank
Well
for Mr. Brown for taking the time to join us this evening. A lot of great information, very enlightening information as well. Do you have any final words?
I do. Again, I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to come on your platform to talk about this. And again, like we spoke about, I'm welcome the opportunity to come back at any time to lend my voice and to help lead this narrative of change throughout our community. I'm also going to pick up my brother-in-law Brian for a little bit because I think there was something relative that came out of what was happening. He kept having this connection issue with his phone, where he would get in, but he would come back out and get in, and come back off because I noticed that he said something. He said, "I lost connection." I want to use it as a metaphor to suggest that during this time we need to stay connected. Oftentimes these issues happen, and then we kind of go back into our silos and go back into life, and just kind of progress until the next thing comes. I think with with reformation that is taking place, the key to it is going to be us staying connected with the change, using that empathy, using our God given talents and gifts, keeping those connected so that we can see the change that we know that we need to make in this country. Thank you guys
Oh,
again.
see that. Oh, not a
Pretty
problem.
good.
And
Good.
yep, and
Nope, not a problem.
no,
Said it better.
thank you for being on, Rasheed. We
Absolutely.
yep,
really
Thank you.
appreciate you
absolutely.
and your service.
And again, we've talked several times in the show about coronavirus and things that we're going through, and I think all the hosts have said at one time or another that this is our time as people to improve and hone our skills, to refocus, reprogram, develop ourselves in this time. Don't let these tragic events, and I mean, it's very tragic and it's terrible, and we don't want things like this to happen. Don't let it turn you too ugly. Let it keep you. Take this time to still refocus and improve yourself. Don't deter and go back to what you were, or wherever the case may be. Just keep on improving. Show people some love, show or random acts of kindness to people, and let's get to work. But that's all I got for this evening. My name's Troy Hill. This is Nights at the Sound Table. We got Brian, Lee, and we got Darius, and we also got Mr. Brown, Raashid Brown, with us this evening. We'll see you guys next time, Nights at the Sound Table.